So, February of 1981, our parents were coming home from Mexico and didn't arrive. So, on Mother's Day that year, the plane was found,
And
and
how long were you married when you became the guardians?
1 year.
1 year. Okay. So,
And she was in law school, and she'd finished her second year of law school. I had finished my first year.
I mean, you guys were right in the thick of it, and then to to be like, okay, now we are the guardians of five children, maybe four. Maybe Carrie, maybe you were
I
technically an
I
adult
was
by then.
I was in college by then. So they were amazing. It was right after I broke my back. Shar and my sister flew to Utah the next day, and Shar spent a week and then had to get back to the family. And as soon as she got back to Washington, the 5-year-old sister went into the hospital with pneumonia. It was a crazy, crazy time.
All right, great to have you guys on our podcast today. I met Jim and Charla Hales and Carrie Gray on a cruise. Actually, they were there with their cousin Nina, and I was sitting by myself. They took pity on a poor soul and invited me to join their table, and we got to know each other throughout that time. And hearing a little bit about their story just made me really fascinated with the life experiences that they've had. And so wanted to have them on today. And so just Jim and Charla are married, and Charla and Carrie are sisters. And they've all had kind of intersecting life events that have happened where Charla and Carrie's parents died in an accident, and the family was kind of in a unique situation when kids were pretty young. So I want to hear from you guys and tell the story of what happened and kind of where you guys were in life. And but first, maybe before that, let me ask, what were maybe a couple lessons that each of you learned from your parents about money, about finances, about wealth, that you think of as influential in your lives, and how it's affected your lives?
We grew up on a farm, and our mom was incredibly thrifty and knowledgeable in all the homemaking skills that farm wives traditionally are known for. And we learned to sew and to cook and to can fruit, although I don't know anyone that does that anymore. But it impacts you forever. Those skills of and desire to be thrifty and make do, fix it up, wear it out, make it do or do without, that kind of mantra. That's mom. That's our mom.
What's the age difference between you two?
4 years.
4 years. Okay. So do
Yeah.
you remember those same things about your mom, Carrie? Do you remember different things?
Yeah, no, she was thrifty. Our dad liked to have fun and could spend money easier than she did.
So did she manage the money in the household? Or did he manage it and she was more of a kind of check and balance type situation? Or
No, I think they worked together a lot. Yeah, I remember sitting in the office with them, and I would write out checks. Dad would sign them. Mom would tell me what to do. Mom did a lot of the book work, but Dad, it was both.
so they both knew what was going on. They probably sat down together on a weekly basis and, balanced their checkbooks together as well. Again, something a little different than what we have now. But anything else, Carrie, that you think of from your mom or your dad that impacted you?
Dad liked to have fun.
Okay.
And family was so important to him, and to both of them. But like, a couple of things that always stand out to me is, like, one time we loaded up in the airplane and flew the 45-minute flight to Spokane just to have dinner at the airport.
And obviously it has created a memory, right? And I've got a saying that, sometimes the memories of today are worth more than the dreams of tomorrow, right? And it's about balancing how do we save for the future, but also have fun. And again, flying a private plane over to Spokane to have dinner. That's an expensive dinner, right? But obviously, it created a memory that you're looking back to from decades before of a fun time of your dad who just wanted to go do something unique and fun with the family and go have an experience together.
One day after Christmas, Dad said, "Let's go to Mexico in our plane." So we did.
He just
That
Also great memories. Great
that day
memories.
we left that day.
wow, wow. So and when did you come home? Did you come home like
Oh,
a
like a
couple
week
days
later.
later, a week later? Okay, so you packed up stuff and it wasn't like put on your swimsuit and let's go, but it was a bit of a trip.
As a farmer, our dad borrowed a lot of money because it takes
Hmm.
a lot of money to run a farm. And so, compared to most small businesses, it's big money that you borrow and big money that you make, but big money is on the line and it is at the mercy of Mother Nature
Right.
much of the time. And our dad usually just rolled with it and was optimistic and did well.
So were there
The
times of plenty and times that were kind of scarce?
we never felt that. We just felt that if we're thrifty, we'll always have enough
Okay.
and enough to have fun with. But the one memory that stands out in my mind when I like the only memory of having my seen my dad discouraged is the morning after St. Helens erupted and ash fell on our farm. Like inches of ash fell on our farm. And this was in May, so the crops were just young. And I remember seeing him with shoulders slumped and never having seen that before. And seeing him walk out into the fields like that, it was stunning because that's not who our dad really was. And it was the unknown. It
Yeah.
was the unknown. Like he could accept all the risks that he calculated.
Hmm.
But that was a complete out of the blue blow.
Right.
And turns out it didn't really make much difference either way.
But it
Well,
still had an impact. I mean, Carrie, did you see that as well? That impact, that heavy burden that you were like, whoa, something is impacting dad that is not what we're used to seeing.
at the time I didn't recognize it, but in his journal he wrote it was the first time in his life he'd been discouraged.
Interesting.
And as it turns out, it killed all the peas, which were a small part of the farm, but the wheat, the potatoes, the corn all had record produce.
Interesting. And was that because the ash kind of acted as some sort of fertilizer
All
or
of the nutrients in it.
did you say desperation or did the word you
Discouragement.
discouragement?
Discouragement.
He felt the
And
discouragement.
I think a takeaway might be you're going to have ups and downs in whatever career or business or financial plan that you have, but stay the course and take heart, maybe.
We can never predict exactly why the market's going to go down. We just know that it will at some point, and then it'll bounce back up. I mean, that's what history has taught us. That's what the patterns show, and that's somewhat what we rely on. But a lot of times there is a lot of discouragement when big market downturns hit during COVID, or the great financial crisis was a huge one where it was just seemed devastating to people. But then you kind of look back on it, you're like, oh, but then we had some really good growth after that, and markets recovered well and did fine. Take heart during those down times, and know this too shall pass. Right? Not everything does pass, and some things are a little longer, and we're going to get to that a little bit in a little bit here. Jim, you're the odd man out here, having different parents, but give us a couple nuggets that you learned from your parents.
I think the one thing that I benefited most, my father and mother, I always knew they'd be there to help financially, but as a teenager, it was clear they didn't have a lot of money, and my own personal financial independence was dependent upon me. And I got the jobs I needed to get during the summer to earn the money I needed to earn to go to college.
And how old were you when you were getting those jobs?
Oh, I started as a paper boy when I was 14 or 15.
Okay.
Worked at a racetrack, kind of cleaning up after the races. Worked at McDonald's. And eventually, my senior year in high school, I was able to get into kind of an apprenticeship program in construction, and that helped tremendously. That was, to a good friend of the family. But I think the thing I took from him, and the thing I tried to carry on and teach my children is, family's there to help, always will be. We're a safety net for each other, but financially, you've got to take responsibility and make sure you put yourself in a position in life where you can, earn the money you need in order to do what you want to do in life.
When you say family's there to help, but shouldn't necessarily be relied on when you can do the things yourself, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly.
Okay.
One of the things I'm proud of as a parent, and Charlotte is too, our children got through college and became financially independent, and most of them were able to get through college with very little help from us through scholarships and other things. Would have been happy to help, but I'm proud of them, and I think they're um, feel self-assured because they did what they needed to do in order to take care of themselves and get where they needed to be in life. Independence in all aspects of life, emotional, social, financial, was an important thing for our children to learn. And we definitely were consciously involved in trying to help them learn those principles.
As you and Charla were raising your children, did they have those expectations? Did you talk with them? At what age did you start talking with them about, like, hey, we expect, we want you to learn this financial independence. We expect for you to pay for, so much of your education, or did those conversations just kind of happen when they were in school?
The most important thing was to make sure that they felt secure. I didn't want to tell my 12-year-old, look, at 18, you're out of the house and that's it. My father may have said that to me, but I did not want to say that to them.
But we weren't saying that to our kids.
No.
No, we were not saying
Okay.
that to our kids. But there was a point, summer started coming and they're sitting around the house, and it's like, okay, look, you can't just sit around the house all summer. And at one point, it was like, okay, you can work for 2 or 3 hours here for us, not get paid, or you can go work 2 or 3 hours for somebody else, and you can keep the money. And
Okay.
between those two choices, I mean, they didn't work at home very much before they were out there hustling and finding jobs and earning money, and it just was a natural thing, I think, for them.
Okay. So if they didn't have a job and working for money that they could keep, then you were putting them to work at home,
Yeah,
for money that they couldn't keep.
and
That
depending on their age, depending on the number of hours they had to work, an
yeah.
hour started off with an hour a day, and then it went up. And
The expectation of work seemed like it was just always there in your household as you were raising those kids. Carrie, let's go to your kids and some of the things that you've taught them, or you taught them from what you learned from your parents or what you learned from your own life.
I like to think that we prepared them to go to college and that they were going to be on their own, pay for themselves. We'd help them their first year. But one of my children likes to remind me every once in a while that his second year, he got a email from the college saying he had been unenrolled from everything because he hadn't paid his tuition. And he calls me and I'm like, well, yeah, you're responsible for that. So so he had the money and he hurried and paid it, but
The expectation for them was that you would help cover the first year of college, and then after that, then they needed to use their money for that. And between a combination of savings and working through college and tuition, they were able to graduate, really covering 3 years on their own, debt free, with their bachelor's.
yes.
Well, I want to turn to this time when Charlotte and Jim. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Charlotte and Jim were recently married, and there was an accident, and there was an estate plan in place. And so, tell me that story.
So, February of 1981, our parents were coming home from Mexico and didn't arrive. So, on Mother's Day that year, the plane was found and they had died on impact. So, I was a junior at BYU at that time, and I went home and took care of the five younger siblings. The youngest was 2, And then Carrie was just younger than me. So you would have been, let's see,
I was
16.
17, junior in high school.
And we have an older brother. He stayed at college. Our parents had an estate plan, a will and a trust. And the will named guardians for the children that were a little bit perplexing. The first couple named were not relatives and were not really in a position to take guardianship. Then my brother was named and I was named, but we were both single at that time. So what we calculated was that it was a fairly recent will, and we figured that our parents intended to live longer. And had they lived 5-10 years longer, what they had set up would have been entirely appropriate, but at that moment it wasn't. And so we found different guardians for the kids, and maybe 6 or 8 months after the plane crash, probably 9 months after the plane crash, the new guardians came to live with the kids and take care of them. And then in the ensuing year or two, I met Jim. We got married, and the younger kids moved forward, but complications arose that made their guardianship situation not ideal, and we became the guardians.
And
And
how long were you married when you became the guardians?
1 year.
1 year. Okay. So,
And she was in law school, and she'd finished her second year of law school. I had finished my first year.
so pretty light schoolwork, like simple stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys were right in the thick of it, and then to to be like, okay, now we are the guardians of 5 children, maybe 4. Maybe Carrie, maybe you were technically an
I
adult
was
by then.
I was in college by then.
Okay, all right. So so there's 4 kids, with the youngest being what, 4 or 5 years old at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 5.
And you mentioned there was an estate plan. I think in a previous conversation you'd said there was some life insurance involved, and you weren't exactly sure on the details. But was there enough to kind of be able to help 2 struggling law students cover some expenses to help take care of
Well,
and raise those kids?
yes, all of the expenses of raising the kids were met through the
Okay.
estate, because there was sufficient there. There was life insurance, and our dad had some investments. Um, and his fun-loving nature was reflected in his investments.
But okay, now I'm curious. What was he invested in? That was kind of that
Well,
reflected his fun-loving
he
nature.
he was not averse to risk.
Okay. Well, he was a farmer,
And
right? I mean, again,
yeah,
you're borrowing lots of money and hoping that you're going to get, income to be able to cover those loans. And
yeah. So there was life insurance, but then there were these investments, and some were secure, but others were in the futures market.
okay,
And sometimes he used the futures market to hedge his own production,
right.
and other times he just did it because he thought he could do well in it. And
Okay.
sometimes he did, but there was enough. There was enough without selling the farm, needing to sell the farm. There was enough to take care of the kids.
There was enough liquid there to cover those without making, massive changes. Now, did you guys move back to Washington? Did you move the family to Utah?
We took custody of the kids at the end of a school year, and we spent that summer in Washington. And then at the end of that summer, we all moved to Utah.
Which,
Where
by
we
the way, is where I learned to drive a tractor.
That's where you learn to drive a tractor. So, and how was that transition?
It was an interesting time because that summer, that June, is when I broke my back in the water slide accident. Just became a paraplegic. And so Shar and Jim, with the new family, in September moves to Provo with their new paraplegic sister. And we had to find a house that could accommodate the number and the wheelchair. So they were amazing. It was right after I broke my back. Shar and my sister flew to Utah the next day. And Shar spent a week and then had to get back to the family. And as soon as she got back to Washington, the 5-year-old sister went into the hospital with pneumonia. It was a crazy, crazy time. And then to get back to school, into law school for both Shar and Jim, and me starting back at BYU as a junior in a wheelchair, with the younger children starting in a brand new, in a city, Provo being a city compared to where they had come from. It was a lot of transition and
a lot
but
of fun.
a lot of fun.
A lot. Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. I mean, you'd broken your back. We've got kids moving out of the school and everything that they know, and again, Jim and Char just trying to figure everything out, keep their heads on straight, at least a little bit, right? And was everybody kind of like, "Woe is me! I'm in this tough situation," or was it we're just all a bag of misfits, and we're just helping each other out, and we're going to make the best of it that we can.
Maybe all of the above, but
Okay.
I think one element that made this time so warm is that we were so happy to be together.
Okay.
And I really felt like my memories are that we felt cohesive and like we could do anything together. And I will say, critical to all of this is, of all the worries we had, money was not one.
Okay. And
Which,
why so?
Because there was enough to care for our needs, that was liquid, that we didn't have to sell the farm, that it could continue to work with its manager and bring in income. But meanwhile, we had, our dad had arranged his affairs and left enough that we didn't worry about our needs being met financially.
Okay.
right. For example, as I got out of the hospital, the executor said to me, he says, "Go get a car, get whatever you need." So I was able to get a car, not worry about having a car with hand controls that could
Right.
accommodate my wheelchair. That was a huge blessing.
Knowing that the executive was like, "Hey, go get it," sounds like a huge benefit.
It was. And to be able to afford the house that we all lived in was a huge blessing.
We would have done what we needed to do in order to take care of those kids. But I think it would have involved Charlotte dropping out of law school had the money not been there. And so we were truly blessed by having that fund so we could both finish and and move forward in life in ways that we wouldn't have been able to had the money not been there.
So, and a lot of that again was the preparation of your parents, Char and Carrie, that they were not. It sounded like not everything was seamless, but from a financial standpoint, things were good, and you guys were able to figure out, the other pieces, and feel cohesive and feel secure. It sounds like, right?
Yes. Yes.
Confident in being able to move forward on things.
Yes. This might be a good point for us to explain that our parents were very wise in who they chose as executor.
And for those who don't know, there's a difference between a guardian. There can be a difference between a guardian and an executor of who you appoint. And sometimes people feel like they have to be the same person. And they don't, because sometimes people are really great with money, and sometimes people are really great with kids, and sometimes they're not the same people.
As the non-family member involved in this, and all of a sudden having these responsibilities in these kids, I was very grateful that the guardian was separate from the executor, because it would have been very, very difficult for me to spend money from the other family in order to take care of these kids. Clearly would have taken care of Carrie's needs, but for him to say to us, what do you need, for us to give it a budget, for him to approve it, and me not having the responsibility of being concerned about the money, because everything that was used to pay for the kids was money that wasn't there for the distribution when the kids got older. I did some estate planning work as an attorney, and I always brought this conversation up with my clients. Do you want the guardian to be the same as the executor? And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, but most felt like they saw the value of having somebody independent make those decisions, not put it on the guardian.
So to be able to remove some of those conflicts of interest that could be created for the executor and guardian if they're the same person, or trustee and guardian, again, that brings in a different element. But having those be separate people can, I think, remove a lot of the emotion or the feeling of like, can we spend the money on this? I mean, it's gonna benefit the beneficiaries, but it's also gonna benefit me. And do I feel comfortable with that? So not
Exactly.
having to worry about that at all really allowed you guys the freedom to just be able to focus on really what was important, which was
Exactly.
the relationships, the raising of those kids, and and your own lives as well.
That's it exactly. We have an older brother, and of course, he has interest too, financial interest. Um, and it was just so wonderful to have a third party who we submitted a budget to and made sure our spending was appropriate, and we could all account in a very transparent way both to our older brother and to the younger siblings as they grew up and then would inherit. They would know what was spent and how, um, so that those conflicts of interest just, it would have been very burdensome to try and work through those if we didn't have this third party involved. And this man was a really, really close friend of our family, and he stayed executor of this state for a long time, decades.
So even though potentially you guys could have become the executor of the estate if the document said so, or if you wanted to, it was like, hey, this is working really well, and I imagine allowed him to be part of the family and
Yes.
stay connected. And it takes it takes a lot of stuff sometimes to be an executor. I mean, a lot of knowledge, a lot of time. It's not a huge amount, but it's a solid commitment.
When you're running a farm, it took a fair amount. He
Yeah,
deserves, he deserves a special place in the afterlife for
yeah,
what he
yeah.
did.
Carrie, what were your thoughts kind of as a beneficiary, but not necessarily an executor or a guardian in all of this? Or was it almost all consuming, the accident that you had, that it was kind of like, was it a bit of a blur, or did you, what were your thoughts kind of during this process?
Um, it, I mean, it was hugely life changing. But my memories are not of being stressed about money. Even a couple of years into it, and once I got married, I still, I could call the executor and give him a budget, and he would send me money, that I needed. And that was just a huge burden that I didn't have to worry about. I think, if I remember right, that money that I took at that point just was like subtracted from what I would be distributed at the time of the distribution.
It
Okay.
it might be helpful to mention that um, the our parents' estate called for distributions at 20, was it 25, 30, and 35?
Yeah.
Okay.
So prior to 25, the executor could give money for education and basic needs.
Mhm.
Then at 25, you got a third of what's coming to you, and then a third at 30 and a third at 35. That's why it took so long for this whole thing
Yeah.
to play out. And so I think it was set up really wisely. It worked really well for our family.
So that if at 25 they don't blow it all.
Okay.
And if they get a third and blow it, at least they have 30 and 35 to look forward to.
I've just seen, we think at 25 we know everything, but Uncle Bud comes along and says, "Hey, I got a great investment opportunity. Just allow me to have that money, and I'll get it double in 3 years." And Uncle Bud just maybe good meaning, but particularly, I think if you're young and you've lost your parents, you tie in very closely to your extended family. Certainly, Charlotte did. Extended family is of great support to us for the most part. But if there's an extended family out there who not with evil motive, but just thinks he's better than he is, it's hard to say no when that's your support system. And so by restricting the funds, it's easy to say no. That was the primary reason. I trust my kids. I trusted them when they were 25 completely, but I knew if I wasn't here, that external pressures could be put on them that would perhaps cause a decision that they would regret.
Being able to spread that out, have some restrictions in place on it, so that it all didn't come out at 25. But I mean, was it having a third of that? Was it very helpful at 25? And were you glad? Did you feel like you needed some of that came out at age 30 and 35 sooner? Or again, was it enough that?
My recollection was that we used some of our first third to buy a house before we were 25, and the executor was fine with that. He saw the money go right into the house.
Okay.
And so we had access to it.
No, I think that's about right. 25, 30, and 35. At 25, you need different things than you do at 35. But I think it was about right. Oh, you said pros and cons. Well, the pros are you need it when you're young more than you do when you're older, but then you have the wisdom when you're older to take care of it better, perhaps. I don't know.
So potentially, if they said we're going to do, a distribution at half of it at 25 and then half of it at 60, you might be wiser with it at 60, but you're like, I don't need it at 60, right? I needed it in these younger ages where we were buying a house, where the kids were growing older, where
if you're unwise with money at 35, you're going to be unwise at 60. But I don't think the same could be said between 25 and 35. That's my view of it.
Yeah.
Well, and you want the kids to work for what they have.
Carrie, I want to spend just a couple minutes understanding a little bit of, because I think it's fascinating, and we could do a whole nother podcast on this, but tell me about how you raised your kids being a paraplegic. I mean, I think that's so awesome, and you just don't hear that much. So,
well, I just have been super blessed. I had my first kid, and then I got pregnant with twins, which just blew my mind. As I got the ultrasound, I started laughing and crying at the same time, thinking, how?
I think you told me that's when you learned that God had a sense of humor.
That's right. That's right. How could I possibly take care of twins? And it was crazy. But after I tell people of multiples, just get earplugs and either take a picture or write it down because you won't remember. It's just so busy, but a huge blessing. And then our other kids were, 3 and 4 years in between the last ones. And
we band together, we figure things out. As long as we have, if we've got each other, then we've got a good support system. This is what I'm gleaning from this conversation. We've got a good support system, and the financials are important too, but they're there to support and not, it doesn't replace the need for anyone, and you guys can just really come together and have that confidence, knowing that, hey, we may not be doing it like someone down the street, but we're going to band together and we're going to make this happen. We're going to be okay, and we're going to have our hearts lifted kind of throughout this by each other.
Right.